So, person wants to debate transgenderism, um, abortion being morally permissible, and they want to debate atheism being correct. They want to debate ethics, two types of ethics: utilitarian ethics and free Palestine, amongst other things. So, I did not prepare for all the topics of the debate, but I don't think I need all the knowledge in order to deduce all of these. So transgenderism, you know, should should we call a transgender woman a her, pronoun her, versus also is the transgender woman a woman? And you could try and linguistically deduce it down to where a transgender woman is a woman based on some kind of weird gender class. But if you study the origin of genders is associated with the sex of the person all the time. Throughout almost all of history, the origin of the genders are associated with the sex of the person. And I can give modern day examples today. The English language has evolved. Meanings of the words don't really evolve. The meanings of the words relatively stay the same. So, are you trying to assert that the word for gender, has changed because a couple of people in classrooms across the United States and across the world decided it changed? Or do you want to have a real philosophical discussion? Because you can just define woman into existence to mean transgender woman is a woman. You could just define that, but that's not an argument. Uh, in fact, I can give you many more arguments that dispute this. So, like, for example, uh, and I'm not against using the pronouns for people I respect, but towards objective reality, we're going to go down a slippery road here. Uh, Classically, a man has always been the male side of the species, and if you want to dispute that, then you have to find a way to make a bull not a male cow. You have to find a way to make other things for other animals that we name by their sex, not that. Gender is not just a specific characteristics associated with identity. Necessarily, it is identity in a dual parallel sense, in the sense that identity is not something that you just think you are. But if identity is something that you just think you are, which is not what identity means. Someone's identity is not somebody who just thinks they are. Somebody who believes they are a police officer is not necessarily a police officer. Somebody who believes they are X is not necessarily X. The same would be true for genders. Um, you would have to make an extension of that system. And the extension of that system has already been given, which is trans. The extension of that system has already been clarified. An adjective trans added to the noun woman. Trans woman is not necessarily a woman. That's why you need the adjective. Um, So you're going to say, well, what are these countless examples? And I would offer the term mother. Throughout all of history and all of time, mothers of different animals are the ones who care and have birthed them usually. Uh, Adoption is relatively new. Considered the entire lifespan of the human race, 150,000 to 300,000 years in existence. Mothers have been the ones who birthed and nurtured them. Adoption is relatively rare. Not that it couldn't happen. Adoption was for the necessity of the child, so that the child can call someone mother, even though objectively they were not their real mother. If you would argue from the feelings' sake to say that, well, their feelings would say that person is, yeah, sure, that person may be equated in their feelings to be a mother, if you want to use the feelings argument, but that doesn't make it in any way objective. You could go with the word girl, and you might counter argue several different things. First of all, why do we know a girl's sex, for example, other than the obvious physical fucking features that are there? For clarity, looks can be deceiving. So, to be called a woman and to not actually be a woman is the goal for a trans person who's a man, and vice versa. You have fit the illusion. You have done all that is necessary to be who you think you are in almost all intents and purposes. But on some fundamental level, they're not that. They're not that. You could offer arguments that are hypotheticals. What if they were gifted a vagina and the entire chromosomal structure just completely changed, and all the things necessary? That then yes, but that's not what has happened. Their organs were rearranged in order to appear like the structural organs of the opposite sex, and they don't quite appear that way. So, is a trans woman a woman? Is a rock a fucking rock? Is false gold gold? And false gold is not fucking gold. And so, the objective answer is obviously going to be no. Even if you tried to make it yes. Let's say, even if you tried to change the word and detach it from all intents and purposes of what sex is. Even if you tried to do that and you were successful in doing that, there's some fundamental thing that you're completely missing, and the fundamental meaning of the word has completely changed, to which the trans woman would want to be called a female. Because let's get to the bottom of this issue. The trans woman does not only think they are a woman trapped in a man's body, They think they are the female trapped in a male's body. And so, if you made the word woman completely useless, it does nothing to soothe and help the trans community. That's my case. Is abortion morally permissible? Even as somebody who's a libertarian, who could offer no reason for the law to step in to stop a woman from aborting a kid, aborting a child, because I find that it would be morally reprehensible for the government to step in and stop the woman. I will not concede that abortion is morally permissible. It is morally reprehensible. It is morally wrong to kill a life, if you would, a human life, objective human life. For all intents and purposes, the only reason it's not considered a parasite, which you would want to go there, is because it is a part of the body. In fact, if you go into the animal kingdom, along all the animals who do go through pregnancy and do have children, some through rape, all those animals, none of those animals would consider the baby a foreign object and a parasite. Even amongst the most intelligent animals, animals that are more intelligent perhaps than some human beings, like dolphins, killer whales, etc., would not consider, with complex languages, etc., probably social networks, would not consider the offspring, which is the term for fetus, a parasite. And so what you're dealing with is killing a truly innocent life, morally permissible, and the answer to remain morally consistent is fucking no. The answer is no. It is not morally consistent to kill an innocent life. And none of the excuses and circumstances make it morally justifiable. It is just morally inconsistent to use force against someone in the act or preventing the act from being accomplished. Because along with the killing of an innocent life being morally inconsistent, it would be morally inconsistent, again, to kill a human life given the circumstances of moral consistency, starting with consent. So if you have your moral ethics are based on the intrinsic value of consent, then you're violating the consent of the life. One would argue about antinatalism in the case of moral ethics based on moral realism attached to moral laws based on consent. And the answer would also be no. Bringing a child into the world is not against their consent because, in, for example, the future, the child doesn't exist. It cannot give consent because it doesn't exist. And so you don't approach everyone with a knife and go to kill them because you assume they don't consent to living. You don't do that. That moral system would break down pretty rapidly. So, no, the position doesn't support antinatalism. So you could have a position where it is morally reprehensible for the government to violate a woman's intrinsic right to violate the offspring's consent. Because it could also be of her violation of consent to have the baby, if you will. So it could be morally reprehensible while also being legal. And this is what I dislike about politics, is a lot of people want to throw their moral values into politics to such an extremity that they would say that something like killing a innocent life is good, because that's what morally permissible means, is that it's good or it's neutral. And it's definitely not neutral. It's not neutral. This is why 95%, possibly why 95% of women who have abortions feel grief. You could go down the other roads. What the hell does free Palestine mean? I'll get to atheism is correct. I'll get to that at the end because that's a more complex argument. What does free Palestine mean? Well, it turns out that Free Palestine is a movement made by Syrians in Syria, an armed movement. It's an armed Syrian movement to which they would do away with the entire Jewish nation, including death, including killing the entire Jewish nation. You can't defend that. You can't defend, well, in general, you can't defend war. War is a reprehensible thing, so it's really difficult to defend war. The only excuse for war would be on the defense side. So you would probably attempt to argue that it's somehow Israel's fault that England put Israel there, even though there were Jews already there. And then a few million more moved there, which, by the way, 45% of them are Americans. So if you're on the American side, you're offering up the blood of Americans to the Palestinians. And I'm not saying that the Palestinians aren't in deep shit. Not saying that. Somewhere in the 1940s, England just up and abruptly said, this is where Israel is going to be. And before the 1940s, for a little while, the Jews, the Muslims, and the Christians were at peace. For a little while. But it's going to sound a little bigoted and biased, but only so much as I can observe. Only so much as I can observe, there are far less Jewish extremists, far less Jewish haters, far more Jewish secular people, so far more Jewish atheists than there are in any of the side on any of the Palestinian side, and of the Palestinian atheists under their rule, under their government, on the Syrian side. The capital punishment is allowed for those who are atheists. So I don't see why an atheist would support Free Palestine. If you don't like the war, then support the borders. Because that nation's been there for 70 years now. And while it can't be defended why it's there, it can be defended why it still can be there. Without supporting a, of course, religious Jewish state. Of course. To say atheism is correct and defend Islam on the other hand is just fucking dumb. Makes no sense whatsoever. Because Islam would have your head. Then finally, atheism is correct. Like this, you're just going to present this as the assumption that belief in no gods, which I'm presuming that's what you're saying, or are you saying there's no justified reason to believe in any type of thing other than atheism, which is like, in a sense, saying all belief is unjustified without evidence, which completely unfolds the rest of your fucking arguments that you would want to argue about in the first place, like the gender beliefs that have been transformed, the Free Palestine arguments, which I assume that you have. It would unfold all of that shit if that's the argument that there's no justified beliefs without evidence, because there's not a whole lot of evidence for all the other things that you would want to debate about, which makes it hard to debate about. I don't know why you would stand on those sides. So other than that, taking a purely philosophical stance, I could easily say I'm God, which I have done. But some of the people who are religious are going to be super offended, and the atheists are going to not know how to deal with this. I can just say that I'm God for the justifiable reasons that I am me. I have created myself in my being, and I'm the God of myself. I am my existence. And you could substantiate and say, well, you were born out of a womb. No, one instance of me was born out of the womb, and that is not me today. In fact, I die probably every day. The identity changes almost every single day. So I am literally creating myself almost every single instance. My memories and existence that substantiate me, create myself. I am my own God. Then atheism would be false. Because it couldn't stand the test of universality. Or I can go a more difficult route and argue for pantheism, which I am. I am a pantheist, and I stand by pantheism. And initially, I would be a pantheist out of, happiness, which would be a justified reason in believing in pantheism, because it leads me to happiness. But it also gives meaning to the universe, full of values. So instead of saying the universe is full of values, which is the atheist position, or not the atheist position, the naturalist position, because now I have to switch the fucking subject in order to get a pin, because what is an atheist, really? Because there's so many millions of different types of atheists, so I might as well switch the pendulum to naturalism and dismiss naturalism altogether in order to get rid of atheism. A type of naturalism, excuse me. And so we're running into this problem at the end of at the peak of all our sciences. We're at the bottom of the barrel of the universe. We run into this issue of the fact that everything's interconnected in quantum mechanics. And then the emergent properties of quantum mechanics, everything's interconnected through space-time. I don't have to give a quantum woo argument. I can talk about space-time. Everything is interconnected through space-time. This is evident of space-time, the expansion of the universe. So everything being interconnected, everything is Unitarian. Everything is one. Being that everything is one, that gives it the characteristic of divinity. There's also essence of infinity in the universe. The universe is infinite. So the universe itself can be divine. But the essence of the universe is even more divine. It holds all the information of the universe. That's an objective fact based on the laws of physics. I don't have to say it's conscious either. In fact, such a statement is understated. the information of the universe could be in such a way that it's a solid state. That all the information can be gathered at once, known at once, by a non-conscious entity, a being. A being that's not conscious could be the literal quantum field of the state of the universe, the essence of the universe, giving it divinity. And it fits all the qualities of a being, of an essence, an unconscious thing. It experiences through us. It does that. That's not a leap. That's the gradual changes in material things. This is called pantheism, naturalistic pantheism, which supersedes naturalism. The case for naturalism is then fucking destroyed. Because in a type of naturalism is that nothing is necessarily interconnected and it's all deterministic, but it all came out of chaos. It really did. Chaos theory is one of the best theories out there now. Now, I assume that now that I've answered all those issues, or tried to, and I can still go into a voice chat, whatever, and debate, you would want to go into free will versus determinism, which is one of the other forums on this chat. And quite often, lots of people fell against T-Jump and others on this case, but I stand firm with mine. My case for free will is continual. And what kind of free will? Yes, I would argue on the hardest case, libertarian free will. I would argue tooth and nail, because you can't prove determinism. This is the issue. We don't have a way to go back in time. So the hypothetical is, if you were to go back in time, would things change because of a choice? You know, and given the situation, whether you had free will or not, or determinism or free will, it wouldn't matter because the same choice would be made. But given that it could also not be made, so you had an indeterministic outcome, it wouldn't matter. So for all three could fit the explanation, so it would dismiss the fucking hypothetical that determinism could be proven at all. Determinism is then unfalsifiable, but evidently free will's not. Evidently. So, being that free will is not unfalsifiable, it stands as a better explanation since it hasn't been falsified. In fact, it's been there's clear evidence of it. If you define free will as a list of possible futures where that collapses into reality, of the list of possible futures, the choice is what collapses into reality, which is the simplest definition of a choice. And then amongst choices, you could have the standard measurement of imagination. The fact that you can conjure up anything you want with your imagination to make a different fucking choice. So even in a paradigm where you say you have limited choices, guess what? You're left with this tool, this machine, this type of computer that can imagine different kinds of worlds all the time. Anytime you want, as even when you're fucking sleeping. That doesn't that completely keeps you within choice. You can't escape the choice. And so you can't, it easily sums up accountability. It's easier to make people more accountable too. But other than that, it turns out that consciousness is dreamt up in quantum mechanics in the future. And that the finalization of the choice happens before the account of the choice. And that is answered with quantum mechanics. And if you were to dismiss that, you would dismiss the entire link between consciousness and quantum mechanics. What you can do, you can just hand wave it away and say, well, it's just the instruments that collapse to wave. Well, how do you know it is? Because the end result is still a particle. At the end of a single test and a single experiment, if you do one particle, just one, you get a particle that behaved like a wave. And across the entire world, they did an experiment with one particle per each instrument. They did several instruments and discovered that even random electrons across the entire world followed suit of the interference pattern. That it is both a particle and a wave. It is not the collapsing of our fucking observation. That it's not collapsed because of a fucking instrument. And this was also proven with I forgot his name, but he's a physicist who ran an experiment to show that it's not the instrument that is in fact. It was to prove Einstein wrong about the assumptions of quantum mechanics, and that's already been done before. So it's not the instruments; it is the literal reality. That is how it behaves. It is chaotic and deterministic at the same time. It's a type of indeterminism that's deterministic at the outcome, at the reality, at the peak set, which it would have to be at some level in order to have anything. How could you have to have an unstability in the universe in order for the universe to even come into existence. A classical universe doesn't come into existence, only one that has the quantum realm, only one with instability at the bottom of it. A classical universe can't come into existence by itself. It cannot. And so, unless you accept that reasonable theory put forward, I mean, there's going to be somebody who rebuts with something, who thinks they're smarter than the physicists. While at other times they would rebut somebody else, like a flat earther or whatever, and say that, well, that person thinks they're smarter than the astrophysicists. Well, do you think you're smarter than the quantum physicists? Do you think you're smarter than the physicists? If you're not, if you don't think you're smarter than the physicists, stop using that fucking argument. If you think you're right. I mean, of course, we live in a 13.4 billion year old universe with expanse of up to 93.4 billion years, and in the Hubble Event Horizon, it's 13.4 billion years of the observable universe. So yeah, I mean, where do you get the 93.4 billion years? Of course, you get it from the fact that gravity can magnify. Evidently, gravity can magnify light from further away, so you can use gravitational magnifying techniques in order to get to the furthest point, which was actually 93 billion light years away. So yeah, the observable universe is constantly called that, only incidentally, because that is the Hubble event horizon. That is the furthest that Hubble telescope can see. Not because that's the furthest that can be seen. But anyways, you can prove pantheism in a number of ways. Natural pantheism, especially. So atheism is correct. Is a bad presumption. And then you get to the point where you can even say that, again, going back to my first argument, one can say that they're their own God. So you can do that. I'm not saying don't be an atheist. I'm just saying for a number of reasons, saying atheism is universally correct is just false. It's not correct. Not every Tom, Dick, and Harry who is a pantheist or a soda, not everyone under that umbrella of theist, like you think it's a false dichotomy of some sort, is going to be a fucking hand waving creationist Christian, or is going to be a Christian at all, or any of the other religions. I mean, fucking Hinduism has some pretty nice arguments as well. But Hinduism is not the end all be all one true religion either. And it's got a lot of incorrections as well and inaccuracies as well, including this fucking weird connection with the people who use their left hand end up with bad health. So, I mean, if you want to debate this, that's fine. But yeah, I mean, you don't have to. You 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 can be a secular pantheist too. That sounds oxymoronic, but if you don't believe necessarily in a being or a conscious mind creator thing, then yeah, you're necessarily a naturalistic pantheist who's also an atheist who's also secular. You could be all three. It is kind of oxymoronic, but you couldn't not be a pantheist, which would be the most minor position, which is the one would that would fit the person. It is usually the more accurate position that fits the person is the one that they are. So, example A, you could have a Christian who's also a pantheist or a pantheist, but he's still a theist because he's a Christian. In fact, more so than not, he would be called a theist. Even if he didn't like being called a theist, he would be a theist because he believes in the religious nonsense of the Bible. He's a theist because he has to swallow the fact that he is in that camp. He's in the position that fits him more often than anything would be the theist camp, not the pantheist camp. Because pantheism doesn't require 2/3 of theism. In some cases, 1/10 of theism. Pantheism just requires that the natural state of the universe is one. There's other ideas with this. So, for example, let's say you have a infinitely reoccurring universe. In a pantheistic position, you could have an infinitely reoccurring universe, one where time unfolds backwards. And so you may say, well, we don't have souls, but we could live the same life, literally, by the laws of physics, multiple times over. Multiple times over because the universe restarted and began again. You could have a different consequence where all the material things reformed into a life form that was almost exactly like you, in which case you're living the life again. It's indistinguishable from falling asleep and then waking up again. You just happen to fit the paradigm. Some would offer, well, how do you get that connection where the consciousness died billions of years ago and then comes back billions of years later? How does that consciousness reach? And it could be utterly that consciousness is not affected by time in and of itself. It could be that we need a better theory of consciousness. It could be panpsychism, where consciousness fades out and comes back together. Like multitudes of ideas. There's the concept that consciousness is within the fabric of the universe of material things, and the material things are like a fragment of what consciousness is, because the material things emergently propertize consciousness into existence. And so, but those fragments fall apart, and then eventually those fragments come back together. You would have the same consciousness come back together. It's like saying, how could you not have a duplicate? And also, there's a problem in quantum mechanics. So you can have the same state, but likewise, you you must also be able to transfer information. So you have a state that's super complex that gets destroyed. That complex state gets destroyed and fades into different uh, billions of states. Eventually, if those states came back together, you would have the same conscious state. It would be indistinguishable from the state before. And because of quantum teleportation, like if you would argue um, that the essence of the thing is the information, which is not necessarily true, but if you argued that that's tethered somehow to the information, then in quantum teleportation, when the item is being destroyed and its information transforms into another item, um, like with two particles, you have a neutron and a proton, and you were to change the proton to a neutron, um, and the neutron is destroyed here, but there's a neutron over there, you could argue that the neutron was never destroyed, but the proton was. In fact, that's what would happen in the mathematics. The neutron was transferred. And so the destruction of a quantum state doesn't necessarily mean that the being themselves is destroyed. So in a death state of a person who dies, their consciousness could, in fact, come back together. For one example, and one example alone, if they're quantumly teleported, their entire being is, almost their entire being, except for the information of the being, is transferred over to something else. Them, again. Everything's the same about them. And so, at this point, are you going to argue for some special exception to consciousness? Are you going to say that the consciousness didn't transfer? It was destroyed? Or are you going to say the consciousness was transferred? And the materials that took its place were destroyed? Because that's actually what doesn't exist anymore, is the materials that took its place. It's kind of like an alchemy. And if you were to argue that the consciousness wasn't destroyed because it's obviously right there, then you have to accept that consciousness is transcendental. Destroying a being doesn't eliminate the information of the being, and then when all the information of the being comes back together, it would recreate the being, even their experience, their idle experience. So either someone fears death so much they don't want to test it in a quantum teleportation. I would test it immediately because I trust that I am a bunch of information states. I know that I would exist on the other side. I can say for certain that if all my material information is transferred, then to a degree of certainty, then my conscious information is transferred. If you're going to argue from a materialistic perspective, this would be the best argument. You would say that, well, since consciousness is based on a brain, if the brain is destroyed but teleported through quantum mechanics, then the same brain exists. The person who is experiencing in location X is now experiencing location Y, not recreated in location Y. Otherwise, that'd be inconsistency with materialism. That for some reason consciousness has a special quality that can't be transferred. That would give it a supernatural quality. In which case you would say that, well, it dies. It dies worse than rocks die. It dies worse than atoms die. It dies worse than material things die. It's an unnecessary case to make. No, it's just like the rocks. It's just like the complex stars. It's just like the complex things. It just lives on in a different location in a complex way, like it did before. You're not special pleading anything. That's not a leap. The leap would be to say that it doesn't exist anymore. I guess that would be the argument for a different type of soul. Not a soul in general, but you could have the artificial argument of an artificial soul, if you would. I'm going to stop here because 40 minutes is way too goddamn long for you to watch. I know like halfway through you're probably going to quit. We're probably going to have a voice chat debate.